Hey everyone, welcome to Resource Drop. Today we're going to discuss how you can make your dream game, publish it, and not die in the process. This is the name of an article written by the lead developer of the Godot engine. This article looks at how indie game developers are getting things wrong. The writer of this article has over 20 years experience in the industry developing and shipping games. Let's dive into a different perspective on how we can approach game development. 99% of indie developers and studios make their main and most fatal mistake when prototyping. Pretty weird to hear. After all, most common advice from interviews and talks is to prototype ideas rapidly and continue going until you strike upon an amazing idea. However, it is argued that the prototype should not come first. Don't worry, no design documents are coming up, but before we prototype, we should ask ourselves 4 key questions. By answering these questions, we'll have a greater chance of success in developing our dream game. Before we get into these questions, the article brings up another interesting point to keep in mind. To make a successful game, keep your scope small and avoid risks. Common advice, but this is considered bad and inexperienced advice. Instead, the idea is to manage the risk. Do the scope you want, as during the development process, your strengths, limitations, and boundaries will be revealed. I really like this idea, and for me, it defeats the concept of predefining what your scope is before the project starts, as this method causes limitations on yourself and your team. Rather than cause these limitations, allow the development process to show you what these limitations are. You might be able to do more than what you thought was possible with this new mindset. Now back to those 4 key questions. These are: who will play the game? How will you reach the target players? How will development be financed? And what makes your game different? Let's go in detail over the 4 key questions and see what we can get out of them. Question 1. Who will play the game? This is the first question we must ask ourselves. The article suggests trying to picture who is going to play the game. Is it for everyone? Are you going to make a casual game for the mass audience? Is it for the mainstream audience, a type of first-person shooter or role-playing game or something along those lines? Is it for a niche audience, a turn-based strategy or adventure type game? The list goes on. There are so many different genres and games, but the main idea is to have a very clear picture of who these people are playing your game. Question 2. How will you reach the target players? Now that you know the target audience, how will you make them aware that your game exists? You're putting in so much work, energy, and resources into developing this game. It would be a shame for no one to play it, and also a shame if you didn't sell enough units to justify making your next game. But don't worry, with our target audience in mind, we can figure out where they are. The methods are a little different depending on what type of target player they are, but here are some ideas from the article that may help you out. This is also a good time to point out that the article goes over experience and financial requirements, which I'll be bringing up as I go over the different types of audiences. For a mainstream game, you'll usually need quite a bit of experience developing games and quite a lot of money. Mainstream games such as Call of Duty, Destiny, or Gears of War have standards that buyers will require. These games require the highest level of polish in each of these areas: gameplay, visuals, music, sound effects, story, voice acting, and the list goes on. For some genres within mainstream games, multiplayer is a requirement of target players, as they may not even look at your game if it does not have this feature. As you can see, this isn't a great route for an indie developer to try and make a mainstream game when AAA companies require hundreds of developers and a massive budget. For niche games, your audience is very different. Depending on the genre of game within the niche, you may find them through dedicated sites, forums, subreddits, YouTube channels, Twitch streams, Facebook groups, and way more. You can post to these places and get coverage of your game with audiences of different sizes. You can then use this to gauge interest in your game, which will really help you before going into full production. It will also give you confidence that you will have people who will play your game and that you can sell your game to. Niche games are something indie teams can definitely achieve and have success in. It's also great as you can identify other niche games and see what level of quality you will have to achieve in order to compete in this space. For For experimental games, you can use a very similar method for marketing as niche games. Experimental games, however, are way more risky, as you'll usually be developing something that doesn't necessarily have a target audience. It's up to you as the developer to figure out if you have the resources available to develop an experimental game. Question 3. How will development be financed? Money is something required in order to develop a game. You can't develop games on a $0 budget. You'll need to pay for utility bills and living costs. You'll also need hardware, so computers, mouse, keyboards, and any additional hardware required to develop the game. You can use free software, but I wanted to mention these points, as you'll often see people saying you can make games for free, but there are so many things you must think of and be realistic about, especially if you want to treat yourself as an indie studio or business. Money is very important. So how can you go about financing development? The article suggested a few methods. The first is getting a publisher. A common thing publishers can do is give you an advance in sales. When looking for publishers, try to look for games similar to yours and see who published them. Devolver Digital are a great example of this. I highly recommend you visit their website and check out the games in each genre. If your game suits their catalog, you may be able to send them a vertical slice of your game and get funding. Crowdfunding is another option, with websites such as Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or Patreon. This requires a huge amount of effort on the developer's side, so be prepared. You'll need to market your crowdfunding campaign and be prepared to develop all of the rewards that backers will receive. Question 4. What makes your game different? This is very important in the article. If your game is not different enough to what is out there, it will fail. People will not play it, publishers will not be interested in it, and no community will form around it. A harsh reality, but we've all seen this happen before. Luckily, there are a few ways to make your game stand out on its own. Not all of these have to come strictly from gameplay. The article suggests that you can have an innovative gameplay concept or an art style that has not been seen before in a game. If you are a more art-heavy team, you can develop unique character design. We shouldn't just limit ourselves to art or gameplay. Another thing you could do is have a very unique way of telling the story of your game if your team has strengths in writing and storytelling. A unique storytelling method with normal first-person controls would still stand out. I'm sure you could think of other ways to tackle this problem as well. The main thing to take away from this is how will you make your game stand out? What areas do you want to stand out in, allowing your game to be different from other games? So we've gone through 4 questions, now you can get back to that prototype. With the 4 questions answered, you should have a clear idea of who your game is for, how you'll finance it, and how it can stand out from other games. With these planned out, you can now develop your dream game with confidence. There are no guarantees that you'll have success, but I believe this method can save us all some time. For example, let's say we are all going for a publisher or investor. If your game cannot impress any publishers or investors and can't get crowdfunding, we know that we should move on to the next game idea. We can save ourselves so much time and resources. Look at this example. Imagine that we used our personal savings, did not show off our game for years, released it, and in the end had no exposure and no sales. We have just used years of our lives and resources in a very inefficient way. Of course, situations could go anyway, but I believe working in a smart way could prevent a lot of stress and burnout in our industry. I wanted to bring this point up as I've read a lot of postmortems where people had regrets and lost a lot trying to develop their games. It's important that we all figure out smarter and more efficient ways to work on our games without losing our health or wealth in the process. These are ideas expressed by the lead developer of the Go.engine mixed in with my own personal views and ideas. I highly recommend everyone goes and reads the article, which is linked in the description as it contains more information. I'm personally implementing some of the ideas presented in the article with my own development style for the game I'm starting development on now. Let me know what you liked from this article and how you work in the comment section below. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for similar content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.